And all across the country today, there are people that are serving with Creation Ministries International. So Keaton, if you'll come, and then this is what I'm going to ask you to do. Just in the back, in between the service, there are some materials that he has for sale. There's a newsletter that you could sign up for. There's a great number of resources. It's a great opportunity for you to be encouraged and educated. So Keaton, if you'll come, and we'll introduce you more formally in the next service. But
all right. All right, good morning, everyone. Lovely to be with you again on this beautiful Sunday. So I'll also tell you a bit more about our ministry in the next hour, but let me jump in quick here because our time is short. I think you'll get a flavor for what our ministry is all about as I go on here. We basically exist to show that the book of Genesis gives us the truth about history, and that even includes the history of a subject like dinosaurs. Now I know for many people that have gone to church all their lives, it might sound strange to be covering a subject like dinosaurs in church. Not too many people hear a Sunday school class message or a sermon on this subject, but I think it is important for Christians to know and address the subject of dinosaurs, because do you realize dinosaurs are used as a tool by the world to teach even young children that the Bible's history is not trustworthy? In fact, this kind of outlook on dinosaurs came home to me in a new way years ago when I was driving home from work, and the car in front of me had this decal on the bumper. You see what's being communicated without even using words here? The Jesus fish, which represents somebody that's a follower of Christ, is being eaten by a dinosaur. And so the person seems to be saying that the very existence of dinosaurs threatens Christianity. It's a problem for Bible believers. Now, why would people see it that way? Because the world says dinosaurs are the poster child for evolution. They lived millions of years ago when Genesis talks about creation in 6 days. But what I want to show you is that dinosaurs need not be a problem for Christians. We can make sense of them from a biblical perspective if we just build our thinking on God's Word and use it as the foundation for our own worldview. So having a biblical worldview is a bit like putting on a pair of glasses, right? I see a number of you folks have your glasses on this morning, and I myself have contact lenses in. So without my contacts, I wouldn't be able to see to the back of the room. But my first year of college, I wore glasses back then, and I lived in a dorm room where that's actually my real dorm on the screen. I was on the second story, so I had a window right beside my bed, where if I looked out that window, I'd see down one story to the ground. And there was a beautiful campus outside, right? A well-kept lawn, some tall trees, and a creek in the distance. But there was one morning when I woke up and I hadn't yet put my glasses on. I happened to glance out the window with my natural eyes, but something strange happened that morning. The ground appeared to be moving. It was this like up and down, wavy movement. And I said, the building is not shaking, this is no earthquake. How can the ground be unstable like that? And I squinted and stared. I couldn't make any sense of it until I grabbed my glasses, and then it was really clear what was actually happening. It turns out, because I'm a heavy sleeper, it rained while I slept, and I had no idea, flooded that nearby creek, and it was a thin layer of crystal clear water covering the lawn right up to the building's foundation, and wind was blowing on this flood and causing that ripple effect. So actually the ground itself wasn't moving, this was just a flood. And so just like corrective lenses, glasses can help us to see the world more accurately than we might with our own limited understanding. The Bible is like a set of glasses as well that helps us to know truths about the world that we wouldn't otherwise know. It tells us the truth about history, the origin of all things, beginning in Genesis. And it can even help us to understand a subject like dinosaurs, believe it or not. So if we have any kids here this morning, help me out. What's the name of this dinosaur? Anybody know it? Go ahead and shout it out. Triceratops. Very good. He's got 3 horns on his face. Tri means 3. So you don't have to know the Bible to answer that question about the name of Triceratops, but here's a more challenging question. When was Triceratops created? Does the Bible answer that question? The word Triceratops doesn't show up in the Bible, but if we go to the 10 Commandments, that's a great place to begin learning about dinosaurs from the Bible. In the 4th commandment, God told the Israelites, you're to work for 6 days and rest for 1 on the Sabbath. And why? Well, verse 11 in Exodus 20 gives us the reason. It says, for You do that, you work for 6 days, rest for one. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and he rested on the seventh day. So God created in 6 days, rested on the seventh as a pattern for the human work week, established that concept of the Sabbath. God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, and this passage in Exodus 20 calls that seventh day the Sabbath day. But notice then that this verse teaches that God made all things, including all the land creatures, right, during those 6 days of creation week. And when you flip back to Genesis 1, that's where it talks about God specifically making the land animals here in verse 25. He made the beasts of the earth, the cattle, the creeping things, and saw that all of that was good. So which day of creation week did God make those land-based creatures? It was day 6. So we've actually illustrated on day 6 land animals, including dinosaurs, because dinosaurs are land animals, right? So just using Scripture to develop our thinking, if we put on our biblical glasses, we would say dinosaurs didn't live millions of years ago. God created them within creation week on the 6th day. And who else did God make on the 6th day of creation week? They're waving at you in the background if you need a hint. Adam and Eve, right? And so using Scripture to build our thinking, putting on our biblical glasses, we can say dinosaurs and mankind would have been created at the same time. Now, I understand how for many people in our culture, we've been trained to think that dinosaurs lived millions of years before mankind and went extinct long before the time of Adam and Eve, for example. But we'll see how later on that would present theological problems for Bible believers. And actually, the scientific evidence helps to confirm what Scripture teaches about dinosaurs living in recent times, just thousands of years ago rather than millions. But when God first made dinosaurs alongside people, what did they eat? Would the people have been in danger from these predatory dinosaurs? Well, not at all, because at the end of the very first chapter, God says he gave instructions for Adam and Eve to eat plants only. And then he says in verse 30, referring to the animals, to every beast of the earth, to every fowl of the air, to everything that creepeth upon the earth wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat. In other words, every plant for food is what that verse is saying. God told all the animals just to be plant eaters, vegetarians in the beginning. So when the Tyrannosaur kind was looking at the lunch menu in the Garden of Eden, were they thinking about Brachiosaurus burgers or a mammoth steak? No, they dined at the salad bar exclusively, right? Maybe tofurkey or something like that, but no hot dogs or hamburgers in the world back at this time because there was no death in the world prior to Adam's sin. Now, some people, again, might be skeptical about this idea that the dinosaurs were designed to be plant eaters in the beginning, along with all the other animals. But people say, when you look at the terrifying teeth on a T-Rex, those are pretty scary. Aren't those teeth obviously designed for cutting and slashing into other animals? Aren't they carnivorous teeth? Well, I do think it's true that you can tell something about the purpose of a tooth given its shape. Molars are better for grinding, whereas teeth like a T-Rex had are better for slashing and tearing through things. But just because an animal had sharp teeth doesn't prove he was a meat eater necessarily. You have to take into account other factors. And when we look at other creatures that we have in the world today, like this skull here also has some pretty sharp teeth. The back teeth are razor sharp, and look at the front fangs like giant daggers. Now, how would you like to meet this animal some evening in the dark? This creature actually lives in caves. But do you want to guess what animal that skull belongs to? Turns out it's the skull of a fruit bat. And fruit bats are not so fearsome, are they? They don't use those sharp teeth to eat meat. They just eat fruit. And so sharp teeth alone are not a complete indicator of what an animal ate. There are many animals with sharp teeth that we might even classify generally as carnivores, but they can go along just fine without eating meat. For example, in Creation Magazine, we told the story about this female cat that grew up on a farm, and her human owners, when she was a cub, they tried to give her meat, and she refused to eat it, surprisingly. And they even tried to wean her onto a meat diet by, when they fed her milk from a bottle, they put a few drops of blood in the milk, but she could even smell that and refused to drink it. So eventually they gave in and fed her. She didn't only eat like fruits and vegetables, but no meat her whole life. She ate a diet of cooked grains and raw eggs, and she drank milk and just chewed on rubber boots to keep her gums healthy. and she did all right. Lived a long time for a large cat. And so even if that's sort of a fluke or an oddity in today's world, it shows that what Genesis teaches is not unreasonable. Animals we classify as carnivores today, which is a minority of the total animals. Even with dinosaurs, the same thing is true. The majority of dinosaurs were plant eaters, herbivores. It's not unreasonable to say that they were designed initially to be plant eaters, only changed to meat eaters after the time that sin brought death into the world. And that brings up another point, because when evolutionists teach young children about dinosaurs, they're always depicting them as though they're fighting one another, devouring each other in the struggle for survival, like Charles Darwin talked about. But if we accept that view, that dinosaurs were always fighting millions of years before mankind, if their fossil bones represent millions of years ago, then that means death has been around in the world long before mankind. But again, what does the Bible teach about the origin of death? It says when God first made the world and put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, the end of Genesis chapter 1, God saw everything that he had made after it was completed and saw that it was very good. Adam and Eve were already there in the world that God called very good, so there was no death and corruption and disease and thorns and thistles yet until the curse that God put on creation. But if we try to marry the Bible with this secular perspective on dinosaurs, rather than putting on our biblical glasses, if we allow the world to indoctrinate us about dinosaurs, then this world that God called very good, where Adam and Eve are already standing on top of that eons and eons long fossil record, representing death, disease, carnivory, thorns and thistles deep down in these fossil layers. Is that the world that God first created and called very good, already filled with death and disease and cancer? Not at all. We find evidence of cancer in some of these dinosaur bones, by the way. Rather, the New Testament, when it looks back on Genesis, it takes it as reliable history. The Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 5 said that, wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world. See, Paul believed there really was a first man, Adam, one man who brought sin and therefore death into the world. And so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. Now, this particular verse is dealing with humans' death in particular, but even that is enough to falsify the millions of years idea, because we find human skeletons deep down in these fossil layers as well, and Adam didn't live 2-3 million years ago to account for all of the human skeletons. So you have to even put human death, dead human bones, long before Adam and Eve, if you embrace the idea that the world is ancient. So to summarize what we've been saying so far, the Bible's teaching is that man brought death into the world. Do you realize evolution says the opposite, that death brought man into the world? Do you see how these two stories are really polar opposites with respect to this important theological question of, was there ever a good world? And then sin brought death into the world. If evolution, or even if just the millions of years are true, then there never was a paradise free from death and suffering. Death has been here as long as life has been here. So again, by putting on our biblical glasses, we've seen dinosaurs would have been created during creation week on the sixth day, since they're land-based animals, lived alongside mankind. They were plant eaters in the beginning. What then happened to dinosaurs in later parts of biblical history? And many Christians have wondered, were dinosaurs perhaps aboard the ark? Or could the flood have been responsible for killing off these dinosaurs, making them go extinct? Well, I don't think the flood could have killed off the dinosaurs, because if dinosaurs were around still a few thousand years after creation at the time of the flood, because they were land-based, air-breathing animals, then Noah would have taken them aboard, because God told him to take 2 of every kind of land-dwelling, air-breathing creature aboard. Now, I think there's evidence to help support this idea that dinosaurs actually did survive even until the post-flood world. They were aboard the ark, I would argue. But how can that be? Many people might wonder. I mean, if you're anything like me, you might have grown up in a church that had something like this painted on the nursery walls. Anybody seen a Noah's Ark that looked like that before? Kind of an overcrowded bathtub, right? With giraffes' necks always sticking out the top, and usually everyone is smiling even though the world is being destroyed. Well, I'm glad that we, putting these in our nurseries, we're trying to communicate Bible truths to young children. That's great. But we ought to be careful not to depict Noah's Ark as a fairy tale. And that's actually what this does look like. Nobody really thinks that that's the true nature of the Ark. And if you try to fit dinosaurs on board that type of Ark, not even one would fit, right? He'd capsize the whole ship and destroy all life. But do you realize that God actually gave Noah the instructions for how big to make the ark? In Genesis 6, he said, the length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, breadth 50 cubits, height 30 cubits. Does that help you to appreciate how enormous the true ark really was? Or do you first have to know what a cubit is? Well, here's a biblical geometry lesson for you all this morning. A cubit is the length of a man's forearm, from elbow to fingertip. Now, in ancient times, they had standardized cubit lengths, just like a foot is about the length of somebody's foot, but we've standardized it into 12 inches, right? So they had standardized cubit lengths in ancient times. We don't know for sure which version of the cubit that Noah used, because there were slightly differing lengths. But if we use a foot and a half, is about the average length of a man's forearm, that would give us a rough approximation of the ark's size, and means it looked like this. Around 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet tall. There's a couple of people to scale to show you how much space was on the true Noah's Ark. In fact, at that size, Noah's Ark had about the same volume as 522 freight train stock cars. So these are the ones designed to house several hundred sheep-sized animals. And granted, that would be packing on the animals pretty tight. I imagine on the Ark, they had a bit more room to roam around. They had to survive that flood for about a year's time, is how long the creatures were aboard. Now you might say, okay, I appreciate that Noah's Ark was really, really enormous, a big vessel, but still, the size of the dinosaurs, weren't they huge as well? Like some taller than your house? How's Noah going to fit two of every single kind of dinosaur, even on a big, big ark? Well, let's think about the size of the dinosaurs for a minute. I've actually got a little toy version of, what's the name of this dinosaur, by the way? Stegosaurus. I hear some whispers, yeah. Now, how many of you would say that this represents a life-sized version of the mighty Stegosaurus that once roamed the earth? Anybody think this is the scale? Or were dinosaurs bigger? Well, guess what? This actually could be a life-sized version of the mighty Stegosaurus when he first hatched out of his egg. All right, now to be fair, I've cheated because I think this is not meant to be a baby, a newly hatched Stegosaurus. He's got full-grown plates and spikes on his tail. But my point is that even these biggest dinosaurs started out as little dinosaurs. Because we found many dinosaur eggs from around the world. The largest dinosaur egg that's ever been found is about twice the length of an American football. So maybe something like that, but skinnier than a football. But the vast majority of dinosaur eggs are even smaller than football-sized. And so dinosaurs started out small. We can also tell from the growth patterns in their bones. Much like looking at rings on a tree, you can see thicker rings mean it grew more in a particular year. Some of these dinosaurs apparently underwent a growth spurt in their adolescent years. And these are some of the biggest dinosaurs, the great sauropods with their long necks and long tails, like Brachiosaurus, Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, and so on. But even once dinosaurs grew up, did you realize not all of them got to be enormous? If you've seen those Jurassic Park movies, for example, this is a screenshot from one of those. The Compsognathus is pictured there. That's not a baby dinosaur, it's full grown. So either he was about the size of a chicken, or that's a very large, terrifying girl, right? But it turns out that there are some small dinosaurs, and so when you average out the size, it's something like the size of a pony. Maybe not as big as many people might have guessed. So could you fit several pony-sized animals aboard the ark? If that's the average size of a dinosaur, it doesn't seem so difficult. But we've seen the size of the ark was big. The size of the dinosaur is not as great as many people imagine. How many dinosaurs would Noah have had to have taken aboard the ark? Well, scientists classify dinosaurs into something like 700 different species. Did Noah have to take 2 of every single species of dinosaur aboard the ark? Well, if you were here yesterday for my lecture on biology, you realize that the biblical kind is a broader category than a modern-day species, right? Because we talked about how you can have lions and tigers are different species, but they're actually one created kind. They're related. That's why you can cross a lion and a tiger and get a liger. So if the same thing is true with dinosaurs, look at this group we call the Ceratopsia. It's a suborder of dinosaurs, so a much higher taxonomic category than species. Many of these would probably be classified as different species, Triceratops and Leptoceratops and Montanoceratops. Did Noah have to bring 2 of every single one of these varieties aboard the ark, a male and a female of each? Or could these all be cousins, closely related dinosaurs, so that Noah didn't bring 2 of every variety, but just 2 ceratopsians? If so, that would greatly save a lot of room aboard the ark, right? Because God could build into the ceratopsians' DNA lots of potential to have these different hairstyles, horn configurations, I guess you could say, right? They're all closely related. So that limits the number of animals that Noah had to bring aboard the ark. With dinosaurs in particular, creation scientists estimate that there were only about 60 different basic types of dinosaurs, 60 kinds. Even though there are hundreds of species, the number of kinds is much smaller. And so you don't have to have millions of creatures aboard the ark, just several thousands. So it does seem reasonable that dinosaurs, along with all the other land-based creatures, were aboard the ark. If they went onto the ark at the beginning of the flood, then they would have come off the ark at the end of the flood, right? And there's the evidence dinosaurs survived until the post-flood world. But before we talk about the world after the flood, let's think about the flood waters themselves. When they came upon the earth, God told Noah to take representative kinds aboard the ark, individual animals representing those kinds. But what about the other individual animals outside the ark? What would have happened to them? They would have drowned, right? And it turns out not only drowned, but the Bible indicates the flood was a geologically significant event. The rain didn't just cause the flood, it was also water from inside the earth. The fountains of the great deep burst open to initiate the flood. And moving water on a global flood is going to erode rock, redeposit sediment elsewhere. It's going to bury many creatures and provide ideal conditions for turning their bones into stone. So, in fact, that's why we have dinosaur fossils all around the world, I would argue. It's not because of slow, gradual processes over millions of years. It's a consequence of a worldwide flood after sin and death had already entered the world. So it fits with biblical history. Can we look at dinosaur bones and see how they actually do testify to a watery, catastrophic burial? Yeah, in many ways. Here's a few examples. Sometimes you find dinosaur bones buried in what are called fossil graveyards, where you have a whole bunch of bones all moving, all moved and like carried along and mixed up with all kinds of other organisms, and they're buried all in one deposit, like you see at Dinosaur National Monument in Utah. At this particular site, you've got all these freshwater clams, snails, logs, big like tree, trunks, and reptiles and mammals and various birds, and dinosaurs are buried along with them. And these are some of the large sauropod dinosaur bones. How did all these bones get mixed up and jumbled and washed into one deposit? It looks like it was a catastrophic flood. Other times you see the dinosaur bones very much still articulated, most of the bones in place. So scientists aren't just like completely guessing here at where the bones go. You see very complete skeletons, but it turns out many of these dinosaurs and other creatures with long necks, like birds and other animals, those creatures with long necks, when you see them in the fossil record, it's very common to see their necks bent backwards. You see how you can look at the museum displays today. When they don't remove the rock from around the dinosaur bones, that is how they're buried. Sometimes the tails arch backwards in the opposite direction as well. Now, what is it that causes animals to be buried like this? It would seem a very unnatural, uncomfortable position to lie down in. But it turns out there were some secular researchers, they don't have any living dinosaurs to work with, so they instead took chickens. Chickens also have a relatively long neck. And what they did is they took some freshly killed chickens and filled up buckets, large buckets with cool, fresh water, and they laid the dead chickens down to float in the water, stood back and watched what happened. This is a great homeschool experiment that maybe some families might want to do this week and see if you can replicate the results. And what happened is within moments, the chickens' necks began to arch backwards. And why is that? Because God designed them with a stretchy rubber band-like ligament that runs down their spine. And the purpose of it is to help hold their heads up so the muscles don't have to do all the work. But ordinarily, if the chickens die and just lie on the ground, that rubber band wants to contract and it would pull back the head, except the friction, the weight of the head it can't overcome those difficulties. But if the animal's set down in water because it's buoyant, there's less resistance, and the rubber band contracts, pulls the head backwards. Most of the movement happens within moments after death, and it becomes even more prominent if you give it time for the muscles and tissues to decay away. And so it looks like these dinosaurs were buried in water, floating there, and that's why they have that posture. God designed them with a similar ligament to help hold their heads up high as well. Here's one more interesting example. I could give you heaps more from our literature. If you follow our website, our magazine, our books, we talk about these things as well. But these two dinosaurs were buried in 3 dimensions in this posture, and the scientists just removed the rock from around their bones so you could see the positions they had when they were buried. So the illustration on the right helps you to see what they would have looked like with their skin on. You've got a Protoceratops on the left biting on the left arm of a velociraptor. The raptor's lying down on his side. He's got one leg sticking up in the air, and notice actually his toe claw is at the neck of the Protoceratops. So it looks like these two are engaged in a battle in the middle of this fight when both got suddenly buried. It must have been a sudden burial, because if they had died and just sat in this position waiting to get slowly buried over decades or centuries, wouldn't the leg fall down in the meantime? It's not going to stay in that position for a slow burial. It's a sudden catastrophic burial that accounts for fossils like these. Now, many skeptics will object and say, but if that's really true, that what you creationists are saying, humans and dinosaurs weren't separated by millions of years but lived side by side, then why don't we see human skeletons in the fossil record buried in the same layers as dinosaurs? Why aren't they buried together if they really were contemporary? Well, I think that's a fair question, but they often pose it as though it's an impossible conundrum for creationists to answer, and as though it proves these creatures lived millions of years apart, humans and dinosaurs. But actually, we have many counterexamples of just the opposite. For example, the Wollemi pine tree was once only known from the fossil record. It's buried together with dinosaurs, but it's never buried with humans. It's never fossilized alongside human beings. They're separated in the fossil record. Humans are higher up. Wollemi pine trees are fossilized lower down. Does that prove we live millions of years apart? Clearly not, because in 1994 they discovered living specimens of Wollemi pine still around. Obviously, this tree has never gone extinct like they once thought. And the evolutionary community was shocked when they discovered this. They said, this is as surprising to us as finding a living dinosaur. So, however we understand how the flood might have ordered the fossil record into the specific order that it has, even if we don't fully understand the mechanism, it's clear that just because two organisms are separated in the fossil record does not prove that they didn't live side by side. The Wollemi pine tree is a great counterexample, and we have many other counterexamples similar to this. But are we seeing any scientific evidence that would indicate that dinosaur bones in particular were buried only thousands of years ago, as a straightforward reading of Genesis would indicate, because the genealogies tell us Adam only lived about 6,000 years ago, not millions of years ago. If dinosaurs were made at the same time as Adam and Eve, then dinosaurs lived thousands of years ago. Well, we're now finding soft, stretchy tissue from inside these dinosaur bones. In other words, the tissue in the bones has not fully decayed away beyond recovery. It's also not turned to stone. It's still original dino tissue, including the dark circles that you see there are red blood cells. They found bone cells, various proteins. All of these structures would decay rapidly if they were buried in the ground for 66 or more million years. It's really hard to believe that they were buried for that long and still preserved until today. And they found many samples from many different types of dinosaurs. Here's a Triceratops sample, one from a Tyrannosaurus rex. And so the more that we uncover soft tissues from these dinosaur bones, it's a common occurrence today. Again, the evolutionists had a hard time believing this was true when they first discovered it, but it's widely accepted today. And they try to come up with mechanisms for how this could be preserved for millions of years, but the laws of physics and chemistry tell us that is not going to happen. So again, we can review what we've covered so far, that dinosaurs were made on day 6, lived alongside mankind, were plant eaters in the beginning. They would have been aboard the ark because the fossils were created by the flood, that means they were alive at the time of Noah, so Noah would have preserved their kinds. They survived until the post-flood world. So does the Bible mention dinosaurs after the time of the flood at all? Well, again, that word dinosaur doesn't show up in the Bible, but it was only invented after we already had the Bible translated into English. Sir Richard Owen made up the word dinosaur in 1841. We had the King James back in 1611. But if what I'm saying is correct, and people actually did live alongside these fearsome reptilian beasts with giant claws and teeth and horns, and they didn't have the word dinosaur back then, what other word might they have used to describe these creatures? Well, one option would be the word dragon. In English and other languages, the word dragon has been around for millennia. And it's actually used in the Bible in a number of places in the Old Testament, sometimes referring to mythological creatures, but in other cases it refers to real animals. Like in Psalm 148, it talks about the dragons that live in the ocean, in the deeps. Sometimes that word, the Hebrew word tanin, is what's translated as dragon in a few places. It can also mean just like a serpent, like a snake. When the Egyptians battled against Moses before Pharaoh, right? And they turned their staffs into serpents. One of the terms that's used there for the serpents is tanin, a serpent or a dragon-like creature. So I don't think that term refers exclusively to dinosaurs or dinosaur-like creatures. It has a broad range of both land and sea creatures, but it seems to refer to largely, monstrous serpent-like, reptilian creatures. And that most likely then is the term that an ancient Israelite would have given to dinosaurs had he observed them himself. And so it could be that ancient people were aware of these creatures. There are other possible references as well. In the book of Job, many creationists would say Behemoth and Leviathan could be dinosaur-like creatures as well. But dinosaurs don't seem to be around today. What happened to them? I'm sure you folks have all heard about this idea that a meteor slammed into the earth, kicked up dust and gas into the atmosphere that caused catastrophic climate change that wiped out many types of creatures 66 million years ago. But many evolutionists don't subscribe to this theory because it has a lot of difficulties. For example, if it killed off the dinosaurs selectively, why wouldn't it have also killed off salamanders and frogs and turtles and crocodiles? Because all those creatures are fossilized together in the same layers as dinosaurs. We know they did live at the same time. They would seem to be susceptible to a meteor strike as well. So the bottom line is evolutionists really aren't sure what happened to the dinosaurs, why they went extinct. Now, I can tell you from a biblical perspective exactly what happened to the dinosaurs. The answer is they died. And maybe you wanted to know what it was that caused the dinosaurs to go extinct from a biblical point of view. I don't think that creationists have the final answer on this either, but we can do the same thing the evolutionists do, use the best science and our worldview to help us uncover the mystery. And there are lots of reasons animals go extinct all the time, right? They're endangered sometimes because of predators, of a food source becoming scarce, of changes to the climate, of humans hunting animals to extinction, diseases, all kinds of reasons. Small population size, then they get inbred, and it's catastrophic mutations in their DNA and so forth that cause them to go quickly to extinction. So dinosaurs just seem to be one of those creatures that didn't last until the present, after they survived the flood. But interestingly, today, many evolutionists, most evolutionists in fact, are saying that dinosaurs actually have not entirely gone extinct. Are you aware of this? That most evolutionists would say we still have dinosaurs around today because they want to classify birds as a type of dinosaur. And this is the mantra you'll see in all kinds of museum displays around the world and in movies like Jurassic World. But there are other evolutionists that don't even believe this theory because, again, it has lots of flaws. The group of dinosaurs that birds supposedly evolved from are the theropod dinosaurs, the ones that walked on two legs and have short little forearms. But birds have the musculature and the weight in the front for powered flapping flight, whereas these dinosaurs had the weight in the rear. They've got muscular hind legs, a heavy balancing tail. They have backwards anatomy compared to what these birds have. So many differences between birds and dinosaurs. Their lung structure is completely different. Dinosaurs had a bellows-type lung, much more like ours, whereas birds had a one-way lung where the air flows through in one direction. They don't have to inflate it and deflate it in the same way we do. They have air sacs that pump the air through in one continuous direction, so it's not any dead air that goes back out the same way. Feathers and scales, radical differences there as well. Tons and tons of differences between dinosaurs and birds that make this transition by natural means unbelievable. But evolutionists claim they've found many examples of dinosaurs covered in feathers. A few years back, I went to Albuquerque and I visited the Natural History Museum there. How many people walking past this display see this oviraptor, a type of dinosaur covered in feathers, and they assume this is what scientists must have found? But how many stop to read the signage right next to it that says, in truth, paleontologists have yet to uncover direct evidence, fossil evidence of one of these dinosaurs with feathers. So they're putting feathers on the display without having found any feathers on the fossils. And so it's not in principle impossible that God could have created a feathered dinosaur, but I need to see some stronger scientific evidence before I'm going to accept that conclusion. I certainly don't believe that birds evolved from dinosaurs because of the innumerable challenges that idea faces. A lot more I could say about this, but you can read about this idea in some of our resources for more information. The bottom line is this idea is not going to fly. And so we need to counteract the kind of propaganda that our kids are being bombarded with to say that evolution is proven fact, and don't you know that birds evolved from dinosaurs? That's not true at all. They were made on separate days of creation week according to Genesis. So let's summarize what we've learned this morning. Hopefully you've realized I haven't just been here to teach you interesting facts about dinosaurs, but to help give you a biblical worldview and show you how the Bible can make sense of every aspect of reality. If somebody says, do you believe in an age of dinosaurs? I suggest you say, I actually believe in 5 ages of dinosaurs. And here they are. When God first made the world, it was a good design. Dinosaurs lived in the age of design when it was a perfect world free from death and suffering. The animals ate plants only, not each other and not Adam and Eve. But once Adam and Eve rebelled, came the age of disaster. Once they sinned, death, disease, suffering entered the world for the first time. Dinosaurs began to die and devour each other until the sin of mankind became so great that God sent a deluge, a worldwide flood that buried many of these creatures, turned their bodies into fossils. But if they were around to become fossils, then they would have been aboard the ark as well. Dinosaurs survived until the age of disappearance, when they began to go extinct after the flood. And maybe that's when people encountered them and had the legends of dragons that we find in cultures around the world. Finally came the age of discovery, when we discovered their bones, reassembled them, put them in museums for all to appreciate. So hopefully I've convinced you that dinosaurs need not be a problem for Christians. In fact, dinosaurs are our friends. We can use them to teach truths about the gospel message, believe it or not, because one thing that's true about every dinosaur bone that's ever been found is that it is dead. It's kind of sad, but in a sense, the reason dinosaurs are extinct today is because of Adam's sin, right? And yet that points us then to our need for a Savior. We need someone to fix this broken world that's full of death and disease and extinction all around us. That's exactly what Jesus came to do, to die on a cross so that we could be forgiven for our own rebellion against our Creator, but also to one day remake the world, a new heavens and a new earth where there's no more death, no more curse on the creation. So if that's been interesting for you, if you want to learn more, we have some great resources you can check out before the main service here or after that. Creation Magazine is a great way to get equipped on the subject of dinosaurs and other aspects of creation versus evolution. This goes to, I think it's 300 countries around the world, the most read publication of its kind. We've got some books that are great for children, like this one aimed at middle school age. Got some homeschool experiments, not like the chicken thing that I said. No, that's a joke. Or you might, as adults, might want to pick up this resource that goes really in depth about dinosaurs, and you can learn about them yourselves so that you are better equipped to teach your children the truth about these creatures. So we have a fantastic website as well with lots more free resources. And I'll wrap up here by giving you one more verse from the Psalms. There it says in Psalm 104, O Lord, how manifold are thy works? In wisdom hast thou made them all. The earth is full of thy riches. And what I've tried to communicate this morning is that dinosaurs are simply God's creatures. Even though much of the world wants to give natural processes alone, no intelligent design, the credit for making these beasts, once we understand how they do fit with the Bible's history, they are powerful evidence for the majesty of the Creator, and we can give the Creator the glory for the things that He has made. All right. So God bless. I will leave it there. Thank you.